Welcome to the second of 3 MMA Lockcast episodes this week. I'm your host, Manpreet, aka MMA Lock of the Night, your boy on social media at MMALOTN, and the architect behind the MMA Fight Archive, where we just surpassed 3,900 fighter profiles spanning over 17 different promotions for you guys to study from, ensuring that you have everything you need and leave no stone unturned to research these upcoming MMA events. Just this weekend alone, we got PFL, Bellator Dublin, UFC Saudi Arabia, LFA 186, and to end off June, there's also ACA 177, Invicta FC 55, PFL 6, and UFC 303, not to mention all the other countless promotions that we cover on there. We have the entire schedule up there already, so you can research as far ahead as you would like. Everything is just one click away for you guys. There is a 7-day free trial for you to check it out for free as well. Check the link in the description below for the MMA Fight Archive and take full advantage of it. All right. Like I said, this is the second MMA Lawcast episode this week. On Monday, I dropped the UFC Saudi Arabia breakdown. Today, I'm going to be covering the PFL 5 breakdown for you guys. And then either tomorrow or Friday, I'm hoping at least by tomorrow evening, I should be able to get the Bellator Dublin breakdown out for you guys. So a ton of content and matchups and to break down for you guys this week. But this is what I signed up for, and this is what I'm happy to deliver on for you guys as well. So I'm going to go over these matchups pretty briefly as I normally do for these PFL and Bellator events for you guys. A couple of good underdog spots I'm thinking this weekend, so hopefully we can take full advantage of them. Remember, PFL is on Friday, Bellator on Saturday. We also have LFA Saturday night, which I'll be covering strictly with written breakdowns on the Lock of the Night MMALOTN Patreon page, with the link obviously being in the description below. All right, let's not waste any time. We did all the plugs and intros and everything we needed to do on the UFC breakdown for you guys. So without further ado, let's get right into this breakdown. So first fight of the night goes down between Zurcher coming in at minus 500, going up against Julian Ruiz, who comes in at plus 375. Now, Zurcher has been on my radar since he debuted on the Challenger Series for the PFL early last year and pulled off an upset over David Evans. And that was a matchup where I was able to get in on him as an underdog. And now you're seeing him come out as a pretty big favorite in his last 2 PFL outings. He did have to take some 2 fights for Lux Fight League since his last appearance on the PFL because the PFL is just not keeping him busy enough, which is a shame. This guy is very talented. I believe 9-0, 10-0, showcases a very active striking game with his Muay Thai, moving backwards, moving forwards, always active, very high level cardio as well, which allows him to go a full 15 minutes if he needs to. And his grappling game is very, very impressive from a defensive aspect and his ability to assert offensively as well. His opponent this weekend, Julian Ruiz, will be representing the Salt Lake City crew, which is where this fight is actually taking place. You see him training alongside the likes of Ramsey Nijam and even Clay Collard, and he's an undefeated 4-0 professional, seeming to rely on his striking more than anything. He has some good combinations, some good head kicks, some mediocre experience on the regional scene thus far, but again, he's only 4-0 as a professional mixed martial artist. Seems to have some decent pop on his shots as well, but I think he's taken a massive step up in competition compared to the guys that he was facing on the regional scene. I think that this is a prop-up spot for Zurcher to go out there and get the dub, probably inside the distance, but I think that Ruiz shows some solid potential, some solid tools that he could potentially pull off the upset here. So I'm not overly confident on the minus 500 side for Zurcher, but this just kind of seems like a spot for Zurcher to try to get a win against a hometown guy. And the only reason the hometown guy is there is because the fight is taking place in Salt Lake City and they need to sell some tickets, hence why they're propping him up in this spot. So give me Zurcher inside the distance to kick off the card. Next up, we got Andrew Sanchez coming in at plus 170, going up against Carl Albrektsson coming in at minus 200. Now, Sanchez is riding a 2-fight winning streak, most recently picking up a split decision victory over Taylor Johnson in a matchup where Johnson actually lost a point in the first round due to an illegal knee. And somehow the fight still ended up going to a split decision. I have no idea how, but I thought Andrew Sanchez won at least 2 of those rounds there. He got two 29-27s, and then Taylor Johnson got a 29-27, which means that it should have been, without the point taken, 29-28 times 2 and 30-27 for Taylor Johnson. Doesn't make any sense to me, but regardless, Sanchez got off on his grinding grappling style that he's normally known for, likes to push his opponents up against the cage, drag them to the mat, and then make it hell from that top position. But what's kind of bitten him in the ass and which caused him to get cut from the UFC is the fact that his gas tank is just not the greatest. When he is the one unable to set the pace, his opponents can really start to make him work, make him slow down, and finish him in the latter rounds. 4 out of his 5 last losses have come by third round stoppage, and that is just, again, further a testament to what is usually the kryptonite to his game. In terms of the striking, he likes to use a bouncy karate style, darting in and out, landing some good shots. Not a big or a whole lot of power there, more so just to touch up his opponents so that he can eventually change levels or at least get close enough to the cage where he can start engaging in the clinch and eventually looking to get the fight to the ground. Solid fighter. I had a lot of potential and hopes for him when he came off the Ultimate Fighter. I believe he won the Ultimate Fighter as well, but never really panned out for him. His opponent this weekend, Carl Albrektsson, picked up a regional victory over in his hometown or home country of Sweden, but before that actually fell short at Bellator 290, I believe it was, against Grant Neal in a very close fight, split decision loss for him if I'm not mistaken, but it was a tepid paced fight. Albrektsson, in my opinion, was the one landing the more effective damage. Grant Neal was really keeping him on the defensive by pushing him against the cage, looking to land takedowns, but even if he did land the takedown, Albrektsson immediately worked to the cage and started working his way back to his feet while landing damage, while Neal is just trying to hold him in that place and try to keep him on the defensive. I thought damage was in Albrektsson's favor, so I thought he deserved to win that fight. I personally was on Neal that night, so I was happy to get the controversial decision to go my way, but Albrektsson is a guy that normally likes to use grappling offensively rather than defensively. He wants to go out there and put his opponents to the ringer, pushing them against the cage and looking to drown them on the mat. What he was most known for was giving Yuri Prochazka his toughest test on the regional scene before Prochazka made it to the UFC. I believe it was for Dream or for Risen, but Albrektsson out-grappled him for about 9.5 minutes before he ended up gassing out, and Prochazka was able to put together a bunch of shots to put him away there. So he has solid potential. He just really needs to start getting it going and be a little bit more offensive, especially when against guys that want to push the pace like Grant Neal was trying to do with his grappling. In this matchup specifically, minus 200 makes sense. I believe he is just a better version of Andrew Sanchez. I think he's the better striker, although not by a lot. But I think his cardio and ability to dictate the pace here, especially again against a guy in Sanchez who's going to struggle to maintain that pace and maintain that activity level, that will allow Albrektsson to just slowly grind this fight out, wear on Sanchez, and end up winning this fight on the scorecards. Again, minus 200 makes sense. Not a whole lot of value on that line, in my opinion, but I still do think that Albrektsson gets the dub here by decision. All right, next up, Anthony Romero coming in at minus 335, going up against Sergio Cossio coming in at plus 275. Anthony Romero was scheduled to fight back in April against Elvin Espinoza. They pluck Espinoza out of that, put him into the season, and Romero is stuck waiting for another matchup, which ends up happening this weekend. Knock on wood that he actually gets to enter the cage. Before that, we saw him actually compete against Olivier Aubin-Mercier, in a fight where it just seemed he was outmatched, right? Romero normally likes to glide around the cage at distance, even fighting effectively off of his back foot, using his precision striking style to hurt his opponents down the pipe, use some kicks from distance. This is a guy that trains out of Niagara Top Team, which is probably one of the better gyms in Canada right now, and that team is mainly known for their grapple-heavy approach with a lot of their fighters. But Romero more so likes to lean on his wrestling and his striking more than his wrestling and grappling. Opponents that have given him issues are guys that can effectively crash the pocket and land on him even while he's moving backwards and kind of nullifying, using a lot of head movement, using a lot of volume and a lot of aggression with big strikes. That's how Olivier Aubin-Mercier was able to get the win. That's how JJ Okanovich on the regional scene was able to get a split decision victory there. But Romero kind of toes the line with the way that he fights. He needs to ensure that he's landing effective enough shots that the judges see that he's landing with more impact so they can score it in his favor. He could use a little bit of help in terms of the power to make it a little bit more clear in his favor, and that's kind of the challenge with kind of trusting him at the chalky line that he is at. He's an intelligent fighter. He's a solid fighter, but he just wins by the thinnest of margins against certain opponents. His opponent this week in Cossio is a very aggressive fighter. Last time around we saw him, or a couple fights ago, I believe now, we saw him... last time was in Bellator back in October. I believe that was Bellator 300, where we saw him lose about 2 to 2.5 rounds against his opponent, as his opponent was pretty much grappling him, grinding him out on the mat, keeping him pretty much using his defenses off of his back. But it seemed it was clear that his opponent was really starting to slow down, and Cossio was able to pick up the pace in the third round, really put the pressure on him, and eventually find that submission in the third round. It seemed like his opponent almost just fell into the triangle with all the scrambling that was going on, and it was clear that he was tiring, but Cossio knew he needed to make something happen, and he ended up pulling off that submission. So good win for Cossio there. In this matchup specifically, it seems like a spot that Cossio is going to have to take that OAM approach, that JJ Okonovich approach, where they're just continuously crashing the pocket and making it look good optically so that he actually ends up getting his hand raised here. But Romero, I think, is the better striker here. I think he can snipe him down the pipe, land the more effective shots, but he needs to drop him or needs to hurt him pretty badly, or even open up some cuts to make it look even more so in his favor. So minus 335, a little bit too wide for my liking in this spot, but I do think Romero can get off on the better offense here. Likely wins this fight on the scorecards, but Cossio is definitely going to fight for your money. So I wouldn't hate anybody taking a small underdog shot on the Mexican side here. All right, next up we got Michael Dufort coming in at minus 155, going up against Adam Piccolotti coming in at plus 135. This is a matchup between two grapplers. You got Dufort as a BJJ brown belt and Piccolotti as the black belt. Now, last time around, Dufort had a competitive first round against Mads Burnell, but then in the second round, we saw him uncork a beautiful body shot, which led to a barrage of other strikes to eventually get Burnell out of there by submission, and after Burnell went for a desperation takedown. And Dufort is a guy that has largely shown some inefficiencies in his striking game. Paid off for him last time around, but normally you see him getting teed off on against fighters that are much better strikers and against fighters that can usually stop the takedown heavy approach that he likes to implement. Adam Piccolotti had a back and forth matchup against Elvin Espinoza last time around. It seemed like he was just a step ahead in some of the scrambles, being the slicker jiu-jitsu player, even though Espinoza is a black belt himself. But Piccolotti eventually ran into a nasty knee that Espinoza threw in the third round, and that's where Espinoza was able to knock him out and get the finish there. I think Piccolotti is solid. He's an AKA product. His wrestling could use a little bit of work, although I do admire his ability to chain attempts together, not just giving up on the first shot attempt, going for that second, third, and fourth attempt, which is where he's usually able to eventually get his opponents to the ground or able to push them against the cage, jump on the back of his opponents. He's very aggressive in terms of seeking submissions and looking to get his opponents out of there, and I think that's kind of going to be the advantage here he holds over Dufort. Dufort, OAM's training partner. He knows what it takes to be successful in a PFL tournament. He's seen him do it twice, but I think that Piccolotti is just slightly slicker in the grappling realm. And even though Burnell kind of had some troubles getting the fight into the grappling realm, I think we'll see Piccolotti a little bit more effective. Both guys kind of struggle in the striking realm. I think there might be a little bit of recency bias here given the two fights that these guys are coming off of, but I think Piccolotti is ultimately the better fighter here, and I think we'll see him grind this fight out and win it on the scorecards. Next up, Rabadanov coming in at minus 310, going up against Elvin Espinoza coming in at plus 260. Now, Rabadanov is a guy that I've been pretty high on in the past. He was actually my lock of the night play against Solomon Renfro last time around. He had a very slow start, and then in the second round, he started to pick up the pace a little bit, landing some good shots. And then in the third round, we finally saw him successful with the style that he normally utilizes, which is a grapple-heavy approach, and with his jiu-jitsu. He is very strong from that back position, controlling Renfro, keeping him in bad spots, and winning that third round unanimously. But he won that second round by the thinnest of margins, and I think a lot of that had to do with Renfro slowing down and allowing Rabadanov to get ahead of him. He only, just barely outstruck him in that second round. But Renfro did a great job in the first round, stopping the takedowns and keeping Rabadanov having to strike. But I think that Rabadanov kind of accepted that he'll have to strike in the second round, which is why he was slightly successful there, and then eventually being as dominant as he was in the third round. Usually he showcases a good enough striking game to mask his takedowns behind it so he can get his opponents to the ground and grind them out from there. I've seen him gas a tad in past fights due to a little bit of fight IQ deficiencies in regards to, squeezing on submissions that he thought he might have had, but he actually didn't end up having. But he's shown good enough fight IQ to be able to stay in fights long enough so that he ends up seeing the scorecard so he can still get his hand raised. Very solid fighter, though. His opponent this weekend, 10-0, Elvin Espinoza, was close to possibly being handed his first loss last time around against Adam Piccolotti, as I mentioned previously. But we saw Espinoza do a good job in terms of keeping the judges out of it and getting that finish in the third round. Espinoza is a guy that utilizes a high activity rate, high output, and a lot of grappling. He wants to push his opponents against the cage, drag them to the ground, and just smother them from that top position. He's very good in terms of staying away from eating too much damage in return, and he does not settle for bad positions at all, constantly squirming, constantly scrambling, and looking to get to a either better position, pull off a reversal, or just get back to his feet so that he can reset and try to get back to the grappling once again. He's been training at Killcliff FC as well as a couple other striking gyms or boxing gyms in the Miami area, but it's clear that he wants to rely on his BJJ black belt as much as possible so that he can get opponents to the ground. In this matchup, I think it's going to play way closer than the odds are indicating at minus 310. The difference maker being Espinoza's ability to push the pace and keep high pressure. I think we'll see this plenty of scrambles in this matchup, and Rabadanov could have some success early, but I think that Espinoza is the one with the slightly better gas tank, and that should allow him to push through in deeper waters as he sets the pace and causes Rabadanov to slow down. Again, Rabadanov probably the better technical wrestler here, but I think that Espinoza's unwillingness to settle for bad positions is going to keep Rabadanov from having too much success and breaking Espinoza. As we saw last time around, Espinoza was going scramble for scramble against a very legit BJJ black belt in Piccolotti, and then eventually getting that late finish, even while keeping up a high pace and high output, and that could come to help him out in this matchup as well. So I'm going to lean Espinoza ever so slightly. Again, I'm a big Rabadanov fan. I've played him at chalk before with no second thoughts, but in this matchup, I feel Espinoza could shake things up a little bit and cause Rabadanov to slow late and take full advantage of that. All right, next up, we got Sadabusi coming in at minus 200, going up against Tom Breese, coming in at plus 170. On the Sadabusi side of things, he obviously won the welterweight tournament a couple years back. He tried doing it again last year, but came up short against Magomed Karamov. And for this season, for some reason, he is skipping the middleweight division and going right to light heavyweight and hoping to get another PFL title in a different weight class. But I wonder how that's going to fare for him at 37 years old and fighting bigger and stronger guys. Now, he is always going to be the taller fighter, or at least just as tall, but clearly the longer fighter in most of his matchups with his 80-inch reach that he normally brings to the table. In his opening season bout, or regular season opening bout against Josh Silveira last time around, we saw him have to deal with the grappling almost immediately from Silveira, and after having a few good takedown defense moments, it was Silveira who eventually got him to the ground, and then from there we saw Sadabusi immediately injure his thumb, which caused a quick halt to the fight and causing him to lose that matchup. I think that's going to be the issue for C here. He has good striking, decent range management at times, his good 1-2 down the pipe, good leg kicks, but he's going to have to deal with a lot of guys that are going to be looking to take him to the ground, push him against the cage, and pretty much shut down that size and reach advantage that he normally holds over his opponents. And then it's going to come to the grappling. His takedown defense initially looks good, but if his opponents are relentless with takedowns and continuously get in on the hips, they're eventually able to get him to the ground, and then off of his back, he tries to make a few attempts at working back to his feet, but at a certain point, he kind of just settles on bottom, and that is not going to work against some of these light heavyweights that are going to look to establish that top dominant control. C is a great striker. I don't think he's a one-punch hitter kind of quitter kind of guy, right? He's not a land a big punch and put you out. He's a set up the trap and then eventually spring it on you later on and try to knock you out kind of guy. And I think that's going to cause him some issues at light heavyweight against guys that might be able to eat those shots and then still come forward, land their own strikes, land their own counters, or eventually get him to the ground. And a guy that's going to be looking to get him to the ground is a BJJ wizard like Tom Breese, who will likely be selling out for a lot of takedown attempts here to try to keep C from utilizing his striking advantage. Now, I may have sold Breese a little bit too much last time around. He was 6-1 since being released from the UFC. It seemed like he got his mental state in check, which was largely the issue that he had in the UFC. He had 8 fights fall out while he was with the UFC. A lot of it having to do with him and his inability to get over his anxiety of fighting. But once he got released from the UFC, seems like he did what he needed to do to get things right. Like I said, he went 6-1. That one loss coming by a very sketchy shot to the back of the head that he felt like the fight should have been stopped and given him some time to recover. But the referee didn't see it. They let it continue to go on. But then he came into the PFL regular season earlier this year and ended up getting squashed by Rob Wilkinson. I think that was more so him kind of just freezing in the moment once again. He can be hurt on the feet. Normally, when he's in the groove, he has some solid striking of his own. He has a nice jab down the pipe, but it's really his ability to ground opponents and smash them from that top position that makes him so special. He's probably one of the biggest what-ifs outside of Zabit Magomedsharipov in terms of a guy, if they had their mental game completely in check, he is championship material without a doubt. And in this matchup, he holds a grappling edge over Sadibou C, and I think that C does not have the striking power threat that will be required to break Tom Breese. I could be wrong here. It's tough to tell what kind of Tom Breese is going to show up, but that's when you have to start looking at the odds. And in the odds, I feel this is a much closer fight than minus 200C. I do lean on the Breeze side once again. Maybe not as strongly as it did against Rob Wilkinson, but now he has a guy in C who he could possibly overpower, outmuscle, and eventually drag to the ground, and then from there showcase that he is a far superior Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specialist. So I'm going to lean Breeze here. I'm going to lean Breeze by sub, but I would be a little bit cautious in terms of investing in him in this spot because, again, that mental state is kind of a wild card. Sometimes he comes in, looks like the best fighter in the world. Sometimes he comes in and looks like CM Punk could submit him. So in this matchup, hoping that he can go out there and assert his BJJ dominance, get C to the ground quickly, and find that submission. All right, next up, we got Brent Primus coming in at minus 180, going up against Solomon Renfro, who comes in at plus 155. Now, last time around, Primus turned 40 on the day of his fight, and he ended up going out there and putting Bruno Miranda through the ringer, grinding him down, and eventually finishing him in the second round. That is Brent Primus at his best, utilizing his size and his strength to wear opponents down, drag them to the ground, and eventually get his BJJ black belt to work. His striking leaves a lot to be desired, and I think that's something that we're just going to have to settle with, especially with him being at this stage of his career. But if he's able to get a hold of his opponents, kind of crash the pocket with a double leg or with a change in level and eventually get this to the ground, he's going to be very difficult to work with. He trains out of the Portland branch of American Top Team, which is not really known for many high-level guys. Obviously, Austin Vanderford used to be there before he moved down to Florida with Paige Van Zandt. Fabiano Scherner is the main head coach over there, a high-level jiu-jitsu player as well, which is why you see guys coming out of that gym. They usually utilize the jiu-jitsu more than anything, and I think Primus on his best day is one of the better jiu-jitsu players on the roster. His opponent this weekend, Solomon Renfro, is now 1-2 since joining the PFL, but currently riding a 2-fight losing streak. He's been going up against some tough guys, so we can give him or cut him some slack there. But in what he is best at, Muay Thai. He's a guy that started off with the Tiger Showman crew, who is most known for their Muay Thai, as we normally know for guys like Shane Burgos and Julio Arce. And Renfro, good power as well, but he's kind of struggled against guys that were able to dictate the pace or at least get their grappling off. He shows solid takedown defense early, but once opponents are able to kind of accept that they might not get the takedown off the jump, start to strike with Renfro a little bit and try to wear on him with activity, then open up the takedown attempts afterwards. Those guys are the ones that are able to get the better of him, just as we saw with Gadzi Rabadanov last time around. Now, in this matchup, it's tough to trust anybody that's 40 years old, but I think Primus does have the grappling and wrestling edge here that he can wear on Renfro and look to take him to the ground. Renfro has the striking edge, so I understand why the odds are as close as they are here, but I think the odds are where they should be. Minus 180 for Brent Primus sounds right, because I feel like if he's able to get that jiu-jitsu going, Renfro will very much struggle in terms of working back to his feet or try to get off on any offensive success of his own. So I'm going to leave Primus here. I think Primus actually ends up winning by decision. I think Renfro has shown good enough submission defense that he can stay safe. But if Primus is able to get him down nice and early, that could change. Primus could pull off a submission early, but I think it's going to take some wearing and some activity to get Renfro eventually to the ground here. So give me Primus and Primus Primus by decision. All right, next up, we got Antonio Carlos Jr. coming in at minus 350, going up against Alex Polizzi, who comes in at plus 285. Last time around for Antonio Carlos Jr., well, let's give a little bit more history about ACJ. He got cut from the UFC in 2021 and immediately joined the PFL tournament that season and won it that season. In 2022, he was on the path to repeat it, but unfortunately, he had to pull out of the playoffs after injuring his knee, and then he pretty much sat on the sidelines for the entirety of 2023, only to come back this year and pull off a solid submission in the first round of his last matchup, and he hopes to secure a PFL playoff spot if he's able to get another big win in this spot. We know what ACJ is all about. He's a big fighter, likes to utilize his power and his strength to eventually get his opponents to the ground, and then utilize his BJJ black belt from there. His striking will always be where it's at. I think it's going to get as good as it gets. Not the best, but just enough for him to eventually change levels behind a couple of strikes and eventually start implementing his power-heavy style that he brings to the table. But it's his jiu-jitsu that makes it hard for opponents to get the better of him. His opponent this weekend, Alex Polizzi, was in a main event slot last time around where he came up short against Impa Kasanganay, and I read too much into Polizzi's chances in that matchup, as you know, that was a fight where Impa had fought at 185 just about a month and a half prior to that, and then was forced to put the weight back on to make 205 pounds. And Polizzi, being the actual 205er, I thought that we would see him be successful in overpowering and wrestling Kasanganay to the ground, but he was getting nowhere near close to a takedown and was ultimately at the suffering of the striking advantage that Kasanganay brought to the table, and eventually Kasanganay got him out of there near the ending of the first round. Polizzi is a guy that likes to rely on his wrestling. He's very strong when he gets a hold of his opponents, but I'm not the most impressed with his ability to control his opponents. He is on a 3-fight losing streak. Again, a spot we can kind of give him some pass for, considering he came against Impa Kasanganay, Romero, and Carl Moro in a fight that he had a very bad start to, but did manage to muster up some success from like the 8th minute on, but by then it was just too little too late for him. But he is a guy that largely looks to take opponents to the ground and just control them with his wrestling and heavy top pressure. Striking is what you expect from a wrestler, a wide winging hooks, looking across the pocket and knock his opponents out, or change levels and get fights to the ground. In this matchup against ACJ, it's clear that it's going to be jiu-jitsu against wrestling, but I think the jiu-jitsu of ACJ is just far superior to the wrestling advantage that Polizzi holds in this matchup. There's going to be some scrambles, there's going to be some weird movements here, but I do think it will ultimately be ACJ that eventually gets that position required to find that success against Polizzi, and I think he'll be able to submit him here too. My only qualm is Polizzi, like I said, is the better wrestler, and that might allow him to get some better positions here. So even though I'm picking Junior to win this fight and I'm picking him to win it by decision, minus 350 is just a little bit too wide in a fight where we don't know if ACJ will be able to get that dominant position that he needs. We don't know for certain, right? Polizzi could have some success in terms of controlling where the fight takes place, and that might force Junior to strike a little bit more, and maybe Polizzi lands a big shot there. But I think that this will inevitably get into the grappling realm, which is where ACJ should end up shining. So I'll go Antonio Carlos Jr. by sub, but very low confidence in this spot. All right, next up, we got Dovletson Yagshimuradov coming in at minus 360, going up against Simon Biyong, coming in at plus 285. Now, last time around, Yagshimuradov knocked out Jacob Nedoh, who is the former PFL Europe champion, and Yagshimuradov pretty much did not let Nedoh get started at all that night. He started off with his high activity, high output right from the jump, landing some good shots, and then eventually opening up that big shot that put Nedoh out. And Yagshimuradov is one of those fighters that is a complete light heavyweight. This guy can strike and grapple and pretty much do what he needs to do to end up getting his hand raised. We've seen him out grapple opponents. We've seen him out point opponents. We've seen him knock guys out as well. He could end up being the dark horse in this PFL regular season, especially if he's able to secure that playoff spot with another big victory this weekend. His opponent, Simon Biyong, is a guy that normally relied on head-hunting his opponents and knocking them out with the explosiveness and power that he brings to the table, but then recently started to implement a grapple, grinding heavy style, which didn't work out that often for him. Now, in a spot where he's been finished last time around by Antonio Carlos Jr., he's going to be looking to try to get an early win here so he can try to get himself into the playoffs. So I'm expecting his early fighting style to come into play again, which is let's go balls to the wall and let's try to headhunt here and try to knock his opponent out. He's on a 2-fight losing streak, like I said, but he is still very dangerous in the opening few minutes of every fight. And this fight, Yagshimuradov is going to have to be very careful, mind his P's and Q's, and not allow Biyong to land those big shots. I think it'll be very important for Yagshimuradov to try to change levels whenever he senses that Biyong is about to explode with a big shot. And then from there, Yagshimuradov should be able to start grinding on Biyong, wearing him down, and eventually chipping away at him later on in this matchup. I think Biyong is going to struggle to find much striking and power punching success, given Yagshimuradov's movement and his ability to mix it up in the clinch and with his grappling. It will be dangerous. I will be clinching my butt cheeks for the first 2 to 2.5 minutes of this matchup, but I do think that Yagshimuradov ends up showing out the better gas tank and better overall game, and then winning this fight on the scorecards or with a late finish. All right, next up we got Rob Wilkinson coming in at minus 270, going up against Josh Silveira, who comes in at plus 230. We'll start off on the Wilkinson side, who unfortunately, he did win the 2022 season of the PFL. In 2023, he had his opening bout against Thiago Santos changed to a no contest after he popped for steroids and was pretty much suspended for the rest of the season and had to hang it up. And now returned in 2024 with a quick knockout victory of Tom Breese in the first round back in April. Now he's hoping to further secure his position in the playoffs by getting another victory this weekend over Josh Silveira, trying to lean on his striking heavy approach that has made him so successful. We did see him use a grapple heavy approach against Thiago Santos in his 2023 bout, but that was more so him trying to utilize his fight IQ, stay away from the style that would make Santos successful, which is in the striking realm, even though I think Wilkinson could be very successful against Santos in the striking realm if he chose to do that. Wilkinson is a guy that is undefeated since the UFC let him go in 2018. He's won... I don't have the number in front of me here, but I know he hasn't lost a fight since getting released, which is crazy. Very solid striker, training with Factory X whenever he's on this side of the world. Obviously, originally from Tunisia, I believe it is, or somewhere around Australia, Tasmania. I could be wrong, but I know he has a small gym over there. But a large amount of his training camp is done at Factory X so that he can stay stateside for the PFL season and not have to worry about traveling too much. Nasty knees, nasty elbows, very good Muay Thai. Striking is his bread and butter. His opponent, Josh Silveira, is a guy that's been pretty much entrenched in mixed martial arts since he came out the womb, as his father, Conan Silveira, used to fight for the UFC way back in the day, but is also one of the head coaches over there at American Top Team, and Silveira has pretty much been in combat sports all of his life. He originally relied or leaned on wrestling, where he competed for ASU on the collegiate wrestling scene, and that's clearly the style that he tries to implement when he comes to the cage, in mixed martial arts. Solid jiu-jitsu as well. His striking is what seems to need the most work, although he can be competitive against certain guys who may not be strikers or are not as comfortable in the striking realm, but it's clear that Silveira needs to get the fight to the ground. Last time around, we saw him actually take it to the PFL finals. I believe it was last time or a couple fights ago, where he came up short. Last season he came up short against Kasanganay. The year before that he came up short against former teammate, or I guess current teammate. Why is his name escaping me? Russian Dagestani fighter Omari Akhmedov came up short against him. But Silveira, a guy that will continuously need to improve his overall game if he wants to be successful at this level. Sometimes he's fighting just the bottom of the barrel PFL guys that they have, or he's fighting some of the best guys that they have to offer. There is no real in between for Silveira. Now, in this matchup specifically, we know it's going to happen, right? It's striker versus grappler, but I think the grappling of Silveira still needs a little bit better work in terms of setting up his takedowns. He's kind of just bull rushing forward, pushing these guys up against the cage, and then slowly working for that double leg or single end to try to drag them to the ground. But Wilkinson has clearly shown a ton of improvements in terms of his wrestling game and being able to keep fights upright. And we saw him showcase against Omari Akhmedov the year that he won the PFL tournament. I believe that's the same year that Akhmedov eliminated Silveira from the playoffs. And that just goes to show, like, Wilkinson is far more along his mixed martial arts journey than Silveira. And even 2 years later, I think we'll see it showcase once again here. I think Wilkinson holds a solid striking advantage, and his takedown defense will be good enough to keep this fight upright, where he should be able to batter Silveira. Maybe comes through with a late finish, but Silveira has largely shown solid durability, even against Impa Kasanganay over the course of 25 minutes, taking a complete shit kicking that night, but still surviving to see the final bell, and that might end up coming through here as well. So I'll take Wilkinson by decision. The over 1.5 at pick-em odds has me a little bit interested, as again, the durability of Silveira is very important in this spot. But I do think Wilkinson pretty much controls this fight and ends up winning on the scorecards. All right, next up, a striker's delight here, where we have Pitbull, the shittier brother. Let's just call it what it is, coming in at plus 105. He goes up against Bruno Miranda, who comes in at minus 125. Now, last time around, we saw Pitbull pick up his second loss in a row, and it came at the hands of Clay Collard, who was able to pretty much box him up and then eventually finish him in the second round. Pitbull did have minor or very little success in the first round, where he actually put Collard on his butt, but Collard bounced right back up, got back to his pressure-heavy boxing style, wearing on Pitbull, slowing Pitbull down, and then eventually finishing him in the second round. Pitbull is a guy that his name exceeds his talent and skill level, and I think you can see that, especially considering the fact that he only has 2 wins dating back to 2019. One of those came against Peter Queally, who is just, mainly famous because of his ties with Conor McGregor, and then the other one was against a short notice Roberto de Souza, who is mainly just a BJJ player who could not get any of his jiu-jitsu going and ended up falling short against Pitbull in the striking realm. Pitbull, good Muay Thai, nasty kicks, nasty elbows, nasty knees, good punching power. But if he is unable to establish that power and success early, he does start to fall off in terms of his confidence, allowing his opponents to take over and probably even finishing him. He's going up against a very tough test here in Bruno Miranda, who may not have as much legitimate experience as Pitbull, but he does have a 4 or 5 year youth advantage, as Pitbull is now 38, if I'm not mistaken, close to being 39. And then Miranda, 33, 34 years old. Miranda, Muay Thai heavy style, a lot of his training taking place in Thailand. This guy loves to push the pace, stay in his opponent's face, landing big shots, maybe a little bit wild at times, but does a great job in terms of just shutting his opponents down with that pace, pressure, and power that he brings to the table. Last time around, we saw him get stopped by Brent Primus. Before that, we saw him get stopped by Olivier Aubin-Mercier. But the things that those guys held in common were they had solid grappling success against Miranda, eventually finding that finish against him. Pitbull has some decent jiu-jitsu, but I don't think he has the wrestling to cause Miranda enough troubles, and I think we'll see Miranda be able to keep this fight upright and eventually break Pitbull. I think we'll see him land better shots. I think we'll see him a little bit quicker to the punch. Pitbull might be the technically better striker here, but I think it's going to come down to the pressure that Miranda puts on him, and eventually from there he should be able to find the finish. I like Miranda in this spot, and it seems like the public is slowly weighing in on him here as well, as he gets pushed to a minus 125 favorite after being roughly around that minus 110 a couple days ago, and I absolutely agree with him. I think he goes out there and knocks out Pitbull in the second or third round. All right, next up, we got Impa Kasanganay coming in at minus 400, going up against Jacob Nedoh, who comes in at plus 300. Now, Kasanganay last time around was able to finish his opponent, Alex Polizzi, in the first round, putting him in a great position to get into the playoffs once again. He is the reigning PFL light heavyweight champion, and he tried defending their pride back in February against Johnny Eblen down at middleweight. He was very close in doing so. Had a very competitive fight, making it much closer than people expected it to be, but he still ended up coming out on the losing side that night. He did manage to pick up where he left off in the PFL side of things with that quick victory over Polizzi, as I was talking about, and is a guy that's done very well since being let go from the UFC in 2020. He's made a very respectable name for himself, making him one of the higher level guys outside of the UFC. It's largely his striking that has made him so successful. He's also showcased some solid offensive grappling to put himself into safe positions on the ground against guys that might have a lot of power on the feet that could give him some trouble in that realm. But overall, he is just a solid all-around mixed martial artist with a great training camp as well over there at Killcliff FC. His opponent this weekend, Jacob Nedoh, won the 2023 PFL Europe tournament where he knocked out Simeon Powell in the finals. I believe that was back in December. And then he got added to the main roster this year and ultimately slipped in his debut on the main roster as he got finished by Dovletz and Yagshimuradov in April. Nedoh is a guy that largely likes to walk his opponents down and throw big shots and try to knock them out. The rest of his game is still a big puzzle. A lot of his fights get finished early, and we don't really get to see his grappling game or his ability to control guys. The few takedowns I've seen him land, he wasn't able to show much solid control. His opponents were able to work back to their feet, and then he eventually just started walking them down and landing that big power that has made him so successful at this stage of his career. There is just a massive experience gap here that he's going to have to overcome, not to mention the speed advantage that we're going to see from Kasanganay. Minus 400 seems a little bit chalky here. And Nedoh obviously has a puncher's chance, and we've seen Kasanganay get flatlined in the past, so I can understand some hesitancy people might have, but I think that we'll see solid fight IQ, the speed advantage and experience advantage of Kasanganay come through in droves here, and that will allow him to eventually find a big shot on Nedoh or eventually get this fight to the ground where he should have a big enough advantage to find a finish, whether by ground and pound or by submission. But I think we see the reigning champion secure a playoff spot with a finish in this matchup. All right, main event here where we got Clay Collard coming in at minus 290, going up against the grappler Mads Burnell, who comes in at plus 245. Now, Clay Collard last time around did a great job of shutting down the striking game of Pitbull and knocking him out in the second round, showcasing what has made him so successful. What's crazy to think is that he's still only 31 years old, and he continues to get better every PFL tournament that we see him, or PFL season. Every season we see him get a little bit further. We saw him, make it to the playoffs, and then he eventually made it to the finale last season against Olivier Aubin-Mercier, where he ended up falling up short. So this could be the year that he finally ties it all together and ends up getting that championship, especially if he does have another strong performance here. Slick boxing, improving grappling, great footwork, good countering ability, stinging shots as well. That's what makes Collard so dangerous at this stage of his career. And again, 31 years old. He's garnering so much experience and, going through multiple seasons with the PFL that maybe this is what he needs to finally make it to the next level and actually get that title at the end of the year. His opponent, Mads Burnell, got knocked out in the second round of his last fight against Michael Dufort in a fight that was pretty competitive in the early going, but then eventually he walked onto a shot that put him out. It was a submission after he went for a desperation takedown attempt against Dufort. Burnell is a guy that highly relies on his grappling and his jiu-jitsu to control his opponents on the ground or eventually look for submissions. He's trying to settle into the striking game so that he can mask his takedowns a little bit better. He throws with confidence, he throws with power, but it's clear that when he's at a clear striking disadvantage, he starts to get touched up by his opponents. It's all about using that striking to eventually set up the takedowns, which would make him more successful. Now, I think that the line is a little bit wide here, but what I do like is the under at plus money. I think Collard has enough of a striking advantage here to try to find that chin of Burnell and put him away. And Burnell, I think, has enough of a grappling advantage that he could potentially find a submission against Collard and put him out in that realm. So maybe the under would be the best way to go in this matchup, but I do think that Collard still ends up showcasing his striking advantage, really touching up Burnell, causing him some issues, and eventually finding that finish and securing that PFL playoff spot. But Burnell, not a bad underdog at all. Let's still try to squeeze out some plus money by taking some violence here. All right. There you guys go. Full card breakdown for PFL 5. Again, I think I went a little bit longer than I should have here, but when you start talking about these fights that you put so much time into researching for, you want to try to convey as much information as you've been able to uncover and try to make it as clear to the viewer as possible. And even if they don't end up agreeing with some of your picks, maybe keeping them open-minded enough so that they can see what there is to see, or maybe hear some things that they didn't consider before placing their wagers. But there you guys go. All right, later today, I'll drop the top 3 dog of the night candidates for the UFC card. And then tomorrow, I'll be back for the quick picks version of the UFC breakdown, and hopefully also the Bellator breakdown, which I hope to have for you guys on Thursday evening. All right, good luck on reaction this week, folks. Drop that like, drop that subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know when I drop my content. Otherwise, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace.